that didn't change. And so, but we got to do lots of really cool, fun stuff. And so I got to spend a lot of time with both Fran and Ves the last couple of years. So it was a really good time. And I do remember one story. Sharon, you might remember this. So we were at our house, and Ves brought all these puzzles, these mental puzzles, and he's like, you girls can't do any of this. And so that was always a debate. We're like, whatever. And so he put one in front of Sharon and me, and we figured it out in 5 minutes. And he goes, And so that was Ves.
I just kind of want to build on that a little bit, because Fran and Ves took me in multiple times and let me live at their house. So in some ways I feel like they're my second set of parents, just very, very close. I'm sorry, I'm going to want to start with this, but multiple times I'd be living in the basement in a big room where all you guys used to live, all to myself. And one time, well, a couple of things, but I was in there one time and had just moved in, got all my stuff in, and you know, they're always very welcoming and helped me. Went to bed that night, had never slept in a waterbed. Went to bed that night, I woke up in the middle of the night, freezing. Like, what is wrong? You know, more blankets. So the next morning, I'm like, you know, there's something wrong. It's so cold in that room. It was the middle of summer. Ves was like, well, did you plug in the waterbed? I'm like, no, do you have to? Yeah. So I slept in a freezing cold waterbed all night. But yeah, they always were so good to me. And then I would come back and visit too when I was in college. And just one thing I just remember was, you know, you get all caught up in college and just friends and just stuff. And every time I would go out to Fran and Ves's, I just always felt grounded again. It's just such a good feeling. So I really felt blessed to have that. So it was very nice. And another thing, when I would come over, Ves would always, you know, that's a good excuse to cook a huge meal. When he didn't feel like cooking a huge meal, he would go out and get pepperoni pizza, because that was my favorite. And I was like, well, I got pepperoni pizza, Barb, it's your favorite. Oh, okay. It wasn't my favorite. I never said anything. I was like, oh, I can eat a little pepperoni pizza. But no, I'm just so grateful to both Fran and Ves for taking me in like that. Thank you.
Yeah, she was a great help.
Okay, so to piggyback on that, I'm Barbara Mary Ves' sister, and so I have a nice story about Ves, and then I have a question. Okay, so the nice story about Ves is some years ago when one of our sisters passed away, Ves was the one who came to the airport to get the three of us, because we had flown in from different parts of the country. And I'm sure Ves is thinking, okay, this is something I'm going to do, it's a nice thing, but what am I going to, you know, what am I going to do? So he picked us up from the airport and not only drove us to the farm, but he took us out to eat. And so we go to eat, and we all sit there starting to realize what had happened, and he looks at me, and I can tell the look on his face. He's thinking, what am I going to do? So he spent the whole time at the meal, and then the whole time, the more than an hour drive back to the farm, talking about computers. And he talked about every intricate detail of computers that he knew, which normally, in a normal situation, you probably would have rolled your eyes, but I was so grateful. I didn't have to, none of us had to say a word. He talked the entire time. I don't remember a word he said, but I just thought, thank you for not, you know, for just doing what you're doing. And so I thought that was a huge, huge thing for him to do. So, okay, my question is, does the squirrel belong to Ves? We have a decaying, I can't think of the word for it, a decaying squirrel, taxidermied squirrel. So someone's got to start with the squirrel.
We have this tradition in the family. Ves's, I don't know for sure, Ves's grandfather shot the squirrel. Do you know the story?
Well, I don't know the whole story, but it was all, when I came to stay at Grandma's, it was always in the closet. And so then when Grandma finally went to the nursing home, the squirrel was in the closet, and Ves said, well, what are we going to do with this squirrel? And I said, you can't get rid of the squirrel. I thought about this when we were coming here. Thought they really don't have that squirrel. And he said, well, Charlotte, I'll take the squirrel. But that was what I remembered always. I was always, when I went to Grandma's house, the squirrel was in the closet. And it was a story, you know, Grandpa had shot the squirrel, and it was this stuffed squirrel that was just always in the closet.
Okay, so what happened to the squirrel was we took it, and then when my sister and her husband Paul would come down with their 6 daughters, they were bored stiff because there was nothing to do at our house, so they would go down the basement and they would make up skits about the squirrel. So when we moved to South Carolina, we did not want to take that squirrel because it was getting pretty bad. So I gave it to the Stalls. Now somebody in the Stall family, okay, Mary Beth has the squirrel.
I have the squirrel now wears a little news hat with like scoop on it, and he writes newsletters about the neighborhood.
Okay,
And when kids come to the house, they love the squirrels. When Simon came to visit, when Barb's son came to visit, he didn't want to play with anything in the house except he wanted to play with the squirrel. And so the squirrel's looking pretty bad, his ears are gone, and he's posed like this. And it's an interesting piece. And so I just tell people that it's an antique. And they should know that. You ask. And then they don't. And then, you know, it's a conversation.
You know, Peggy, you started the focus on questions instead of stories. So I have a question too, and I'm thinking Carmen may be able to answer this one. You were talking about stories around fishing, and I think you described one time where my dad had fallen asleep while he was he driving the boat or the car? The boat. Okay. For some reason, and I wasn't there, so I hear this too. Again, when you're a child versus fraternity buddy, you have a different perspective on things. But we had lots of kind of toys and fishing and camping equipments growing up. We had a pop-up camper, and then we got a bigger pop-up camper and a couple of boats that gradually got bigger. And then I think the last one we had was a big RV. And the kids actually got to drive that a few times down to Branch Oak. But one of the last things I remembered about that RV was I think it was my dad, and I believe Jim and Duke. I'm not sure which of the men were still alive, but they all went on a fishing trip. And so this is one of the few fishing trips I remember because this is now when we were adults, or we were at least maybe in college or later years in high school. But he came home after the fishing trip, and we all looked out, and the top of the RV had completely been sheared off. You know, they normally have kind of an air conditioning unit up there and a generator and then a roof, and all of that had been taken off. So the story we all heard was that somehow, I don't know if it was my dad driving or if it was Duke or Jim, but they managed to drive under a bridge and ignored the height requirements of the bridge, apparently, and shoot the...
Yeah, I'm going back to Duke. My husband's sitting in the back of the thing, and Duke always drove under the bridge because he had a little car. And it wasn't his thing he was driving. And so he goes underneath it. Well, it had a big air conditioner on top of it. The air conditioner ripped off it and came down. Well, my husband's sitting in the back, and Duke said, "What hit us?" And Jim said, "No, what did we hit?" He said, "I'm seeing the stars."
And the finish of that story is once they got the unit under the bridge, away from the bridge, Duke realized there was another bridge. But that time they had enough sense to let air out of the tires and they didn't scrape anything off. Okay, I think we're...
Hi, I'm Patty. I really wasn't sure what to say, except I was hoping to do a little bragging. Just thinking back, when you're little, everybody thinks, that their dad can do anything. And I'm thinking, all kids think that, except the only difference was that mine, it was true. If anybody's seen, I still have a dollhouse that my dad built that looks like should be in a museum, and everybody, it's my daughter Sophia's now, but if anybody sees it, they're like, "What, your dad built that?" I'm like, not only did he build that, he built my house. He was an accountant, but he drew all the architectural plans, he did all the subcontracting, and him and my brothers did all the finishing work and built a whole house. And he wasn't an architect, he wasn't a contractor, I mean, he built our house. And growing up, I never saw a plumber, I never saw an electrician, I never saw anybody. And because he could fix it all. And you know, it took me a long time to realize that, you know, in my mid-20s and when I was older, that everybody wasn't like that. I just thought everybody did, you know, I live in New Jersey, and it's kind of like California, I guess. Everybody has their lawn workers out front, and everybody, you know, has everybody doing things for them. But I always found it so unusual. So I just, you know, this was my dad. And then actually recently when I drove down, when he had passed, and I spent some time with Fran, she was telling me some more stories that I never knew. Like, for the longest time when she was in college, she wanted to get a computer, and Dad didn't want to get a computer. And she told me that he was mad at her. He was just going to put recipes on it and stuff. This was, you know, a long time ago when not everybody had a computer. And so finally she convinced him, she said. And then he bought the computer, and he sat down, and he read the DOS manual from cover to cover, and went into Paxton Mitchell and told them they had to put their whole system on the computer, and got them to do it. And he wasn't a programmer, he didn't, you know, but he could just do that. He wanted to do something, he would just go read about it, and he could do it. And so sometimes I feel like, sometimes I'm like, oh, I can do that, I'll just get the directions, and then I can't do it, and I couldn't figure out why. I'm like, I'm supposed to just be able to do this. I have the directions in front of me, you know, because my dad just always was able to. So he's an unusual guy, and if you ever saw us together, you'd know we didn't always get along. I have some of his traits, like stubbornness. I like to argue. He likes to argue. So we would argue all the time because we would really not agree on anything. So we spent a lot of time arguing. But as far as memories go, I remember we had some really cool vacations, and driving all over, like for 2-week vacations, the 6 kids in either a car or, you know, a station wagon or a camper or something, going across country. And I remember once going to Vegas, and all of us kids were too young really to go into the casinos. So we were stuck like out in the camper, I think, in the camping parking lot where you plug them in, so he could go out all night long gambling. You know, so we had some great vacations like that. You know, we do some fun things too, but really, you know, so. And yeah, and he was always winning everything. Somehow, even I remember him coming home that night, you know, in the middle of the night, you know, after, with like $900 or something winnings, and so, you know, but he was, yeah, he could be an annoying winner, if anybody else knows. You know, he's, yeah, and you know, sometimes I would try to take it a little personally, but then I'd see him be really annoying and to his friends too, about when he'd win. So it was kind of just how he was, you know. So, and everybody kind of laughed about it after a while. They'd be kind of mad at him for a while, but that was my dad.
I know Fran spent a longer time with Ves than I did, and yes, we got a divorce. But it's interesting how over the years I've really come to love Fran's children and family, and I think we're an unusual family in that we all get along. And I talked to Ves probably, the last couple of weeks before he passed away, and I had sent him some wedding pictures that I'd found in a box that my mother had after she passed away, and it brought back some fond memories. And there was a wonderful picture of his mom and dad with him, with the 2 of us up on the altar at the wedding. And so he was able to have some time to go back, and even go back to when we were married. And we didn't get into discussions about politics, because I will tell you, I am the complete opposite on Ves Mallory on many, many things. But we had the loveliest time talking about things that we did years ago. And one of the things I remember when my children were babies, he just didn't want to change any diapers, and he just didn't want to do a lot of things, but he would stay up and keep me company and make sure that I was up in the middle of the night, because he was up. He was always up late. That was something that he liked to do, and he loved to read, and I'm glad he did, because I think